Sonoma finally brought Eric Johnson Jr. his first win of the season. With today's event being another road course, the other drivers will have their work cut out for him. Will he be able to stomp the field again? We'll find out soon as we get ready to watch Round 10 of the South Sound Speedway E-Series, and you'll see it all live here on the Global SimRacing Channel. Hi, I'm Joe Peak, and with me in the booth is DJ Clark. Behind the scenes is our director, Sean Crackers Ambrose, and he's using cameras provided by Dougie Beard. The Charlotte Roval has been around a long time, but it really made a big splash a couple years ago when it was introduced to the NASCAR Cup schedule. Let's head to our track guide to learn more about it. Welcome to Charlotte Motor Speedway. Until a few years ago, most race fans probably didn't know that this track had a road course layout. Thanks to a huge revamp to prepare for NASCAR to race on it, the Roval is now a top-tier facility. Situated in the northeast corner of Charlotte, North Carolina, there's a whopping 6 different road course layouts. They range from just under a mile to a little over 2 miles in length. Like most Rovals, the high-speed banking on the oval portion makes up the majority of the lap length. However, one unique feature that isn't often seen on other Rovals is that this track includes a decent amount of elevation change. Passing is often difficult, and the 2 chicanes on the oval portion are notorious for their unforgiving curbing. Lesser-powered cars find overtakes a bit easier with the slipstream on the banking, but anything with some oomph is going to have to work very hard to get by their rivals. If anything, attrition often rears its ugly head, and simply keeping the car pointed forward and clean will net you a good finish. While the debate rages on among gearheads on whether oval cars should race here, one thing is for sure, it provides some wild action and almost never disappoints the fans in the stands. We mentioned the Cup cars on our way in, but DJ, today it's not the Cup cars. It's something with a little less power and honestly takes up a lot less space.
That's right, Joe. It is the little dinky starters of the Legend cars going to be tackling the Roval here today. But even though these cars are leaps and bounds different from the Cup cars we normally see around the Charlotte Roval, a lot of what we talk about when we see the Cup cars here is going to remain true. The best passing opportunities you are going to see is going into the heartburn turn and then the back chicane and the front chicane. And those are all preceded by good, long draft areas. The draft is going to be king here, especially as these little Legends get up onto the banking and start to power their way around. The first corner, though, heartburn turn, always tricky no matter what car you're doing. It's a slow application of brake, trying to very gradually slow the car down as you constantly have to be turning the wheel left to take the curve, and any part of that infield section is going to be very tricky. These Legends are very twitchy cars, as we talk about a lot of times, and I think a lot of drivers are going to struggle with that.
Yeah, very short wheelbase, as you can expect. They tend to want to turn on a dime. Before we get to the racing itself, a reminder that this series is brought to you by Key Property Services. Key Property Services, Inc. is a locally owned full-service property management, real estate, and construction contracting company. KPS has been serving the greater Clark County area for over 30 years. For more information, visit kpsinc.net. Key Property Services, where service is the key. It's also brought to you by United Roofs. As specialists in residential and commercial roofing services, they're dedicated to providing customer service that is second to none. Whether you have a new construction project or it's time for repairs, they offer the roofing services you need. To learn how to book a free estimate, go to unitedroofs.com. Let's take a glance at the championship after last round. Eric Johnson Jr. finally getting a win on the board, and he closes in on Isaiah Gill. Now only 5 points between our top 2, and it's even closer between Johnson and Barnes, 4 points separating them. From there on down, nobody's been nearly as consistent as those top 3, Andy Johnson and Chris White, grinding out your top 5. What about for today's race in particular here, DJ? What's that going to look like?
Well, we are in the 10th of 12 rounds in the South Sound E-Series here, so championship implications really starting to play in for those top three of Johnson, Barnes, and Gill. As I mentioned, we're going to be racing the Legends cars around here. It's a 40-lap race, so lots of time to let this track come to you. You will have two sets of tires. Now, it's going to be one you start with and one you can change onto if you start to think everything's going away, and this could be very, very crucial. As these cars are a little bit difficult to control, you do get a faster pair. So if somebody makes a big mistake, totals the car, they can get on back to the pits and take care of it. And the other thing, Joe, is there are no caution flags at all while we are road course racing here. So no slowdowns. Everything's going to be on pace itself.
As we ride on the helmet cam of Isaiah Gill through the infield portion, and then we'll see what it's like coming out onto the Roval part, on the oval portion of the Roval. As gets a lot of counter steering coming up onto there. That certainly won't help his speed, which will be important along this part of the track. But we saw from on board, one thing that I find unique about Charlotte's Roval is that this is, I think, the only Roval I've ever come across that has much in the way of elevation change.
You read my mind, Joe. It's one of the things that makes this track such a treat to drive. When you come up through the crest there in the middle of that infield section, it really does take you by surprise. Now, it's not obviously an elevation change like Spa, for example, but there is certainly enough to be able to use to your advantage if you need it. As you get going up the hill, as we ride on board with Andy Johnson, you'll see it here. This corner starts to go uphill. Ooh, good job to avoid. And then it'll start to crest right here at the top side. That likes to throw the car out of balance, and Andy doing a great job of making my point there for me. You've got to be careful on how you apply the throttle in these tiny little Legends as you crest over that hill, as it will tend to unbalance the car.
In comparison to last week, though, we mentioned Eric Johnson Jr. had the measure of everybody, but it seems that Travis Barnes is quite quick this week in the number 11. So see if he can take the fight to him. Those two, though, are leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else. Isaiah Gill is the next one back, and he's a whole second and a half away from Barnes, with even more, of course, stretching up to Eric Johnson Jr. So could be a two-horse race for the most part up at the front without those cautions to bring them back together. But we did see last week that playing little mistakes here and there can cost you. And if other drivers find themselves slipping up, they can fall down the order pretty easily. And it's not just your overall race pace, but your consistency here today. Ooh, I love this camera angle. Coming right between the front bumper bars of Matthew Dichinowski and coming up onto the banking. They'll get up to about 110 miles an hour from what we've seen here on the backstretch at the fastest point on the circuit, and then they break into one of the tightest chicanes on the backstretch.
They do indeed, and there you see Matthew. I'd recommend taking that corner a little bit wider if you can, but you can see there as he flies on by those curbs. That's going to play a huge factor here today, Joe. These cars are not normally used to going on road courses, and as a result, the bumps that they're used to encountering are little variations in the asphalt, not actual bumps created by curbs. So these drivers are going to have to be very, very careful not to get too aggressive, as those big sausage curves on the inside can really unbalance the car and potentially, as we've seen here in practice, throw them up onto two wheels.
Yeah, I think with how tall these things are and with the thin wheelbase, we could see a few of them tumbling over before all is said and done. Warm-up has now finished. They'll get 2 laps in qualifying, but it's only 5 minutes long. It's a minute and a half, more than a minute and a half, honestly, to get around here. So drivers will have to hustle because they do have to take their 1 warm-up lap to get around. So there's a minute and a half gone out of those 5 minutes. And then you add in the 3 more that you have to do the next 2 laps. They've got very spare on the other side.
Yeah, and it looks like most of the drivers getting an absolute hustle to get out here and get out quickly as we watch the 64 of Brock Denny, one of the first out of the pits. Don't worry there, that area past that white and blue line is perfectly legal. The off tracks here really don't bite you too hard when you're coming through the infield. You will get an off track or a slowdown if you do a major cutting of the chicanes, but for the most part, this is one of the more forgiving tracks when it comes to those penalties.
So as the 64 comes on around the oval portion, starts to pick up speed. Again, this is just the warm-up lap. This one will not count for Brock Denny. He needs to get it wound up, and then he's off on his way on his first timed lap. Up at the top of it in the end, Eric Johnson Jr. had the fastest lap. Brock doesn't hit anything, so he can still get this car turned around and going. There he goes. That'll cost him a little bit of that necessary time. Another spin like that, he actually might run out before he gets to the second lap.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a couple of drivers fail to qualify courtesy of little spins like that, but we watched last week's winner, Eric Johnson Jr., making his way around and diving into this front chicane, as we like to call it. There you see exactly what I was talking about, not getting too aggressive over onto those big blue sausage curbs. Now he's going to come through the quad oval section and dive the car down into the Roval. Here is another one of those crests. The track breaks away from you right as you get onto it, and you line up here for this right-hander.
It is kind of amusing how small these things are compared to the huge hulking NASCAR Cup cars. They look pretty diminutive on this big track. At least we'll have plenty of room to race between them if they are racing in a pack here today. Johnson Jr. coming up and over the crest and out of the infield now. Got to be careful. Almost becomes like a street course with the walls right up to the outside there. And now he puts his foot to the floor and he's on his way.
And using the full effect of that banking, you saw him run it very, very high and then cut down low to get down onto that inside groove. These cars are light enough that's honestly using a little bit of gravity to his advantage. They're pulling him down the track. Now he lines up into the back chicane. There you see all the way up to the wall, runs it on through as he comes very, very close to that inside retaining wall. That is common. That is exactly how you want to take that corner. This lap looking very good for Eric Johnson Jr.
Let's see if he's going to be the first one to set a time. It looks like, yes, he is, of our drivers out on the track. So he'll get to set the bar, and it's likely that not many will be able to reach that bar based on what we've seen so far. As he crosses the line, it's going to be a 34.943. Behind him, Caden Anderson puts one down. It's a 37.4. That's 2.5 seconds off. Dichinowski had an off track somewhere, so his didn't count. He's definitely got to get the second one clean.
And Brock Denny coming to the line. Very, very slow lap there for Brock. And did not count courtesy of that spin that we saw him take.
Barnes just went faster.
We've got a shootout on our hands, Joe.
Indeed, but I think Barnes came across the line with less than 1:34 to go, which is what he did last time. So I don't know that he has enough left to come around for that second lap. Johnson Jr. should, so he can respond. This is Eric Cheney now. These are the only laps that these drivers are going to have in these 5 minutes. Unfortunately, they're just crossing it a little bit too late.
Yeah, and there you saw Eric take a big chunk out of that chicane, so that lap not going to count for him. Jeff Peterson crosses the line. Looks like he's had an offer, a spin somewhere. Scott Degenstein comes across the line. Same story for him. Chris Torres, though, this looks promising.
So let's see what the 99 can do. He's at pace. A 37.985. That'll put him into fifth, as we are still missing half the field for lap times. Let's see what Eric Johnson Jr. can do as he comes down for this final lap. Can he take the pole back with about 13 seconds left? It's a 34.8. That's a 10th quicker, but that's not enough. Barnes has beat him.
Travis Barnes taking it in there. Well, here comes Caden Anderson as he crossed the line to get himself a third place position. Great job for Caden. Matthew Dichinowski also doing a really wonderful job there, coming in fourth place with a 36.982. And Joe, that's going to round out our qualifying.
Indeed. So let's go through our starting grid. Travis Barnes has snuck the pole away from Eric Johnson Jr. At least he'll have one car that he'll have to pass to try and take this victory. Caden Anderson will be starting in third, with Matthew Dichinowski Michanowski in P4. They'll be followed by Andy Johnson in 5th and Chris Torres starting in the 6th position. Jack Franks will be 7th, followed by Ryan McLeod in 8th. And last driver to put a time in qualifying was Hayden Plybon. He'll be followed by Jeff Peterson to his outside.
Scott Degenstein will be back in 11th, followed by Sean Jones. Brock Denny and Eric Cheney will line up in row 7 and bringing up the back of the field Isaiah Gill. Very unlucky there for one of our championship contenders, so he's going to have a lot of work to do, and all of those drivers, just to note, did not set a qualifying time.
That'll make it interesting because we'll have a number of them that are essentially out of position. So we're waiting for Torres to come out to the grid and then we'll get going. This is going to be a fun one because last week, without as many cars as we have this week, we didn't have as much side-by-side racing, but I think both the slipstream and the number of drivers should give us plenty of action out on the track. Last of them make their way to the grid. In fact, I think we're still waiting on Torres, who is in the session. And now he pops his car out there, so there we go. Should see the Porsche Pace car lead them away. Oh, as some of them are a little over-eager. Caden Anderson starting to take off before it's quite time. Now the Porsche Pace car going to lead him off. But we're still waiting on our pole sitter to take off. There we go. Travis Barnes finally heads his way to follow along on our pace lap. As for the temperatures, it's also going to be a little bit trickier because it looks like it is quite slippery. 125 Fahrenheit on the track surface today.
And Joe, that's not going to be as much of a problem when you're on the big NASCAR curves of this track, but rest assured, when you are coming through this infield section where you don't have centrifugal force to keep you down into the track, these cars are going to be slipping and sliding. They're going to have to be very, very careful about those rear tires, be late on the throttle, not to overspin them and to put too much heat into them. So that's going to be a story of the race to follow as well, to keep an eye on as this thing continues to develop. And I have to say, a bit of an inauspicious start there for these guys getting off the line, but my big watch is going to be going down into turn 1, that heartburn turn. It is going to be very, very tricky, and we've heard a lot of chatter from these drivers saying, hey, it's the first lap, it's a long race, just keep it clean.
It is indeed a long race. 40 laps around here will take quite a while, especially for these Legends vehicles. So they've got to try and pace themselves to get to the finish. Remember, it's not how fast you can be over a single lap, it's how fast you are over the course of all 40 laps. As we watch from the back of Caden Anderson, looking at the trailing field behind him. Just trundling along here at 45 miles an hour before they will get going. We should, I believe, see at least one pit stop during the race from these drivers.
Yeah, that is right. They are going to need to. We've had a little bit of an incident in the back, though, strangely. Jeff Peterson looking like he's up into the wall before we've even gotten green.
Ooh, that's not good. So hopefully we'll be able to get things cleaner once we actually get moving. As we wait for everybody to come around turns 3 and 4. We're going to be released from the Porsche Pace car in just a moment's time. And then another incident, it seemed, coming through the chicane. All right. Can Travis Barnes manage to beat out Eric Johnson Jr.? Porsche Pace car getting ready to duck away. There it goes. Going to give control to Travis Barnes. Waiting patiently for the green flag as they come up through the chicane. Green flag is out and they are off. And it's not the greatest of starts for Eric Johnson Jr. To his inside, Caden Anderson already trying to sneak up and take P2 away as they come down into Heartburn turn. Are we going to be clean through this first corner? So far, so good. And it looks like everybody manages it.
And Caden Anderson really able to get a good jump through that corner to put himself into second, with Eric Johnson Jr. starting to trail behind as they go through the first time. And ooh, Travis Barnes takes way too much speed through that corner there and through turn 4 and walks onto the grass. That's going to put Caden Anderson right up behind him.
Already had one car on his lid. Ryan McLeod, unfortunately, having to take a tow after he went up and over through turns 3 and 4. But we come on to the oval portion for the first time. A fantastic run from Caden Anderson, and he has got great momentum. He's going to stay on the banking as Barnes tries his hand over on the very bottom on the apron. Eric Johnson Jr. stays up high. They come up to the chicane. This is going to be a trouble spot all day long. Let's see who can navigate it safely.
They all dive in. Looks like the first 3 able to get through the first section of that bus stop chicane nice and cleanly and in and out. We've had a couple of guys in the back, though, going off.
Looks like Chris Torres, one of them. Hayden Plybon, unfortunately, as well, having to take the off track. And he'll get an automatic slowdown penalty with that one. But he will be able to continue on, as Travis Barnes will lead our first lap through. And while I was expecting Eric Johnson Jr. to be threatening for the lead, instead, he has got to try and fight his way back just to get into second now.
Yeah, Caden Anderson really putting on a masterclass there. As you see Johnson Jr. lose it.
He holds it stationary. Oh, don't pull back into the traffic. He gets it going, but he falls to 7th. So the 14 has got even more work to do now. Let's look at the replay and what exactly happened.
Well, Joe, I think I know exactly what it was, and it was what I was talking about at the start. He just caught too much of that curb and got himself clambering up and over. So watch this, gets that car too much onto the sausage curbs. That upsets the car, not able to get it down when he's back on the power, and that spins him around. But as we go back live, a similar thing has happened to Caden Anderson. Anderson has spun as well.
Ooh, so that means that Dichinowski is now in second place, and Barnes has a huge lead over everyone. A number of mistakes from good drivers so far. Let's see if we can pull up the replay since we missed that one live.
So that's the incident that you saw with Johnson.
I assume this was through 3 and 4, maybe?
Let's see. So there he gets the exit out of 3. Well,
there.
Oh, big wiggle, and just wasn't able to keep it under control. That car just in a massive tank slapper, but a good job from Caden to keep it pointing relatively forward, burning up those rear tires as he gets back underway.
He almost gets hit once again. Drivers are making some dangerous moves to return to the track. Caden Anderson down in 7th. Johnson Jr. means he is up to 5th already. Wonder if Eric's got the pace to try and chase down Barnes. He's got to make up about 10.8 seconds currently, but he has a lot of laps to do it. And right on board with him coming up to Andy Johnson, quickly approaching out of turn 4. See if he's got enough speed. Does he dare challenge him side by side into 5? That's a fast corner. He does. Andy Johnson's going to let him have it.
Really brave stuff there from Eric Johnson Jr. as Andy Johnson Jr. That's the second time in so many corners we've seen that tail of that car start to slip around. So he clearly having a little bit of problems getting the power down. But Eric Johnson Jr. up to 4th place. Now he sets his eyes on the biggest mover of the race, Brock Denny. But we've got some action behind as that's Gill moving his way forward.
Yep, got a better run than Andy Johnson onto the oval portion. So he'll slip up into 5th place. Now that's Caden Anderson trying to outbrake Andy Johnson down into the backstretch chicane. Looks like he's going to snatch it. Oh, but he gets a lot of wheel spin coming off that back and forth as they all spread out. Some of them onto the apron, some of them onto the banking.
and that is perfectly allowed. You can run either line if you so choose, but I think what's really going to dictate that, Joe, is whatever line the guy in front of you decides to run, you're probably going to want to go down there and run that as well to pick up the maximum draft effect. As Johnson again struggling getting the power down in that 28 machine.
Takes a lot of patience on the throttle of these Legends cars. And Andy Johnson will fall to 7th from that lap, having lost 2 positions over the course of it. Meanwhile, in second place, Dichanowski, there in the orange and blue, has Brock Denny pretty close behind.
Yeah, Brock's really, really hounding him here. You can see he's got a better angle there through that turn 5, 6, 7 complex as they work their way back onto the NASCAR section of the track. He's going to try to go wide, carry a little bit more momentum through there, and it looks like he's got it. He dives down to the inside of the banking and all the way off the banking onto the apron. Does Brock Denny go? He is ahead as of right now, and that is Eric Johnson Jr. starting to close in.
He's got a lower line as Dichanowski allows him to take, the shorter route, but they're going to come together and into the wall. They don't hit too hard. Looks like Eric Johnson Jr. can collect it. Dichanowski has to get it completely turned around 180 to get going once again. Isaiah Gill gets promoted to 3rd. Let's take a look at the replay.
Joe, this honestly just looked like a Pruitt fade gone bad from Matthew Dichanowski. We see here the closing speed of Eric Johnson Jr. Very, very good speed. Here comes Dichanowski across the track, just runs into him, Joe.
Might not have been aware that he was going to be right down at the bottom, coming towards that chicane. I'm just glad that they both didn't hit too hard and are able to continue on and keep fighting. All this has been doing has been helping Travis Barnes by leaps and bounds, 12 seconds ahead of the next car. He's sending it through turn 6 and getting ready to re-enter the oval. Brock Denny is back into 2nd after losing it briefly. He's got a lot to make up, though. He's staying consistent, and I said consistency is key here today.
He certainly is, but I really have to say, if I am Travis Barnes, I'm not sleeping too easy at this point with Isaiah Gill and Eric Johnson Jr. sitting in 3rd and 4th. They've clearly got the speed to challenge here. I do think, however, one of the questions is going to be if Eric Johnson Jr. sustained any damage in that little run-in with the wall on the backstretch.
And let's not forget that Barnes is in the hunt for the championship along with Eric Johnson Jr. So he wants as many points as he can get over Eric at the end of today to help him into the final 2 rounds. There you see the 64 Brock Denny coming out of the chicane, holding down low. Still losing time, though, to Travis Barnes as it's gone up another half a second. Barnes with a 1:35.4 last time across the line. Brock Denny just now coming up to that time in line himself. And it's looking like for him, he'll notch a 1:36.9. So actually almost a second and a half slower, I think.
That's right, and looking at some of the times from our other contenders, Gill and Johnson, their last lap significantly slower than Barnes. So Barnes, the absolute class of the field right now, but as we've seen, he cannot afford anything, as that's somebody, I believe that's Plybon, spinning and on his roof.
Yep, looks like the 15 is going to have to take a tow. He already had quite a bit of damage on the car.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of damage. That front engine cover completely off of that black machine. So there you see him bring it in through the corner. It's to slow it down. It's a tricky braking area. Those curbs catching him out once again, Joe. Throws off into a little bit of understeer, and that just bounces him into the wall and onto his head.
All right. Well, he'll be many laps down by the time he returns to the track. Unfortunately, you can see the 23 of Jeff Peterson has also been stuck in the pits. We're watching the battle for 2nd and 3rd currently. Isaiah Gill riding up on the high side on the banking, trying to run down Brock Denny. Last time, it didn't quite go well for him. See if he can run it a little bit cleaner. Ryan McLeod, a lapped car, is ahead of them.
He is, and normally I would say that would cause a few little headaches there for Brock Denny, but with as wide as this track is, I don't think that's going to be the case. But here comes Gill with a full head of steam down into the heartburn turn.
Denny's going to defend from the outside and carry the speed well. He rebuffs Isaiah Gill, but this is looking more like a matter of time as the 24 has quite a bit of pace compared to the 64. Down through 3 and 4. Getting off of there, slinging the car as fast as you can from the slight bit of banking. Looks like Brock Denny carrying it better of the two of them as he pulls it to about 4/10 ahead of Isaiah Gill. Oh, but he goes wide through 6.
Brock Denny not making this easy for Gill, but just making a couple of little micro mistakes that are really ending up to cost him. But if he can get a good run here out of turn 8, that might be just enough to help him. There you see him diving down to the inside line. Looks like Gill is going to hold it up on the banking and try to carry a little bit more momentum as they go down into the back chicane.
Yeah, and I can tell you that Gill's speed is slightly faster. And while it allows him to catch up, he was running a longer line around there, so it all evened out in the end. Maybe he could pull the slipstream, though. Is he going to go back up on the banking? Yes, he is. I don't know. I feel like Gill needs to get tucked in right behind the 64.
I'm with you, Joe. That is going to be the fastest way to do it. Yes, you're going to carry a little bit more speed if you're up on the banking, but getting the effect of the draft, I think, is going to be more beneficial to you. But Isaiah Gill clearly has his own idea of what to do as now they go into that front chicane. Big lock up there from Brock Denny. That's going to allow Gill to close up.
This is a better opportunity, and he's going to get fully alongside him. Last time he wasn't brave enough to carry his speed. This time he does a little bit better, and Brock Denny actually overshoots the corner. He has to check up to make sure not to hit the wall, and that will give second place to Isaiah Gill.
So move Isaiah Gill up into that second place position as Brock Denny going very wide there again. Gill now setting his sights on Travis Barnes as that's Brock Denny spinning it.
Going to lose a couple spots as well. Anderson and Johnson Jr. easily overtake him going by. I think this was another case of just taking way too much of that curb. Drivers cannot really hit them that hard.
No, they can't. The suspension in these old Fords, not the best in the world for it. So here you go. You see them lining up. Bingo, bango. Yep, that's exactly what it is, Joe. Too much curb, and that sends them spinning.
Does get it going. Thankfully didn't hit the wall in that. Could have damaged the underside of the car, but don't think that will affect things too badly. Remember we saw Dichinowski have problems. Well, he's got Andy Johnson close to him. Let's see if these two start to give us a little bit of action. We are on board with Dichinowski. Johnson, locks him up big time coming into the final chicane.
He does. That's not going to help the run that he wants to have. There you see them get back onto the banking coming out of that back chicane. Andy Johnson very much falling behind Matthew Dichinowski. That gap extending out.
Just about a quarter of the way through the race now. So this is ticking by relatively quickly. And it looks like Brock Denny is in pit lane. Oh, but he missed his pit stall. Oh, no. So the 64... unfortunately, he's going to have a lot of extra time added to this one.
Yeah, and I'm watching him. No, Joe, I just watched the replay. What that was is he had an error coming across the start-finish line and dove across the grass and then had to tow back to his pit box. So I think that was an error of some kind. That's not a scheduled stop. That's not deliberate.
Well, he's thrown away a good opportunity at a second place, that's for sure, as he's now down to 10th and continuing to bleed positions. In the meantime, we keep watching Andy Johnson and Matthew Dichinowski. Andy's lost a little bit of the ground that we saw him gain before. Let's see if the slipstream will be enough for him to get right back up to that 18 car.
Well, he's taking the right approach here, trying to stick in the slipstream of Dichinowski. I think that is going to be the fastest way down. He's able to get that gap down to about 0.6 of a second, and now under. You can see the effect of the draft coming into play. And once again, this is the battle now for 5th place on track. A little bit of a lock up there as Dichinowski really messes up that back chicane.
That should give him a slowdown penalty. but it doesn't seem like he's given up a whole lot to Andy Johnson. Johnson maybe just a little too slow through that chicane, and didn't cost Dichinowski much at all in the end. So coming back around to the final chicane, braking hard for this one. Both of them trying to stay off those curbs and bring it tight up against the wall to the outside as they cross the line. It'll still be Dichinowski, well, now in fourth, as Caden Anderson has come into the pits.
Joe, I was watching that one as well. That is another situation where an error has forced a tow. Caden coming out of the final corner, got onto the power too early and just spun the car at the start-finish line. For once, though, it was not a victim of the curbs. It was just a victim of Caden's right foot.
A number of drivers have been climbing up the order and just through, keeping it pointed forward and keeping it on the track. Anderson's taken a tow and appears to have DNF'd. So has Brock Denny, sadly. So we've already lost those two, along with Eric Cheney and Hayden Plybon. I don't see Jeff Peterson likely coming back out, as he's 13 minutes of repairs into his visit to pit lane. In the meantime, Dichinowski, as he puts a lap on Ryan McLeod, brings along Andy Johnson down the backstretch into the chicane.
And same story, different lap. Very good close up there for Andy Johnson, getting that gap down to under 0.5 of a second, but they both now get a pretty good power off of the back chicane. So advantage is starting to shift back to Johnson here ever so slightly. That gap now hovering at 0.3 of a second.
Johnson trying hard to see if he can overtake the number 18. Don't think he's going to be close enough this time down into the chicane. Both of them braking hard into there, and Andy Johnson can't make any inroads this time through.
No, he cannot. Wildly different lines there through the heartburn turn, as Johnson gets a little squiggly on exit that'll cost him about 1/10 of a second. The gap now holding at about 0.5 between these two drivers. This is the best battle we've got on track. Andy Johnson doing everything he can do to chase down Matthew Dichinowski.
Of course, Dichinowski racing in the Baby Grands in real life at South Sound Speedway. So experience in the lower levels of oval racing, which would be similar cars to these. We hop on board with Andy, watching Matthew lead him around. Ooh, big slide there, but a nice catch from Johnson to keep it from smacking into the wall. Still looks like that cost him a few car lengths.
It did, and that's the last area you want to have it, Joe. If you were going to make a mistake on this lap, if you're Andy Johnson, you want to make that mistake in the infield section, but not on the later part of it like that, because you want to maximize your speed coming up onto the banking. And you can see just how much it cost him there, but once again, he's so much better on the brakes through that back chicane. They're both going to power off here. Little bit of a slide from Johnson. That's going to cost him ever so slightly. The gap holding at about 0.4 of a second, and now because of a bad exit, it's up to 6.
This is all taking place behind our leader, Travis Barnes, who now has a gap of 22.5 seconds over Isaiah Gill. I posed the question, can Eric Johnson Jr. regain the lead and chase down Travis Barnes? So far, the answer has been a firm no. 27 seconds up to Travis, and the last 3 laps that Eric has run has been miles off of Travis Barnes' pace.
You know, Joe, I'm trying to look around Eric Johnson Jr.'s car to see if there's some damage that could be slowing him. Looks like he's got a little bit of dinks and dunks on the right rear of the car, but nothing massively significant. So I don't have a good answer as to why Eric's pace has fallen off quite so massively as it has.
I'm keeping an eye on him as we continue to watch the 18 cycle around here, just to see what the top speed of Eric Johnson is, if he's down a little bit. He's down mildly. He might be losing just a little bit on the oval portion as we hop on board with him. He only made it up to 109 miles an hour that time through.
As you said at the top of the broadcast, these cars getting up to about 110, 111 unassisted. Yeah, look at how slow he is there, Joe. I think he's got some sort of damage that just may not be visible to the naked eye.
And doesn't seem like much being 1 mile an hour down. Woo! He's pushing. I give him that. He took a little bit too much curb through the final chicane. But yeah, I think that 1 mile an hour down, lap after lap, that sucks away valuable time. And he just doesn't have the pace to try and challenge the number 11.
No, and now if I'm Eric Johnson, I'm going to start looking ahead a little bit. As we speculated, we think these cars are going to have to come in for fuel here at some point, probably change tires with such high track temperatures as we're dealing with. And when that happens, if I'm Eric Johnson, I'm going to take full advantage of that faster pair and hopefully try to claw back the now 4.9 seconds at least up the road to Isaiah Gill.
Having to deal with a little bit of lap traffic there. But everybody managing to get by each other safely. We were watching Dichinowski and Johnson earlier. I can tell you that Dichinowski has now dropped Andy Johnson. It's about 2.5 seconds, so the 18 is focused forward from here on.
And he's got to look a long way up the road, Joe. I hope he's got some pretty good vision as he's about 20 seconds back from Eric Johnson Jr. in third. So lots of ground for Matthew Dichinowski to try to make up.
Interestingly, all but 2 of our cars are still on the lead lap. Dagenstein and McLeod are lapped by our leaders, but 1st through 8th are still out there and still on the same lap as our leader. Travis Barnes looks like he will be coming up to the next one. Jack Franks maybe within about 5 or 10 laps.
And like I said, this isn't normally what we see here in the South Sound Speedway Series, as you get a lot of lapped cars that come up behind and can really mess up somebody's race. This track is wide enough and these cars are so dinky that I don't think lap traffic is really going to be slowing too many people down that much today.
As we watch from above, Travis Barnes taking that number 11 along the apron and then drifting it up to the high side, right along the wall, braking hard, navigating it through the chicane and getting back on the throttle as soon as he dares. And then once again, keeping it on the flat bottom of these long banked corners.
He's doing a good job to keep everything nice and steady here. You see him coming up out of that apron area, diving down into the chicane. So very tricky. Oh, big clop of the curb there, but he's able to keep it under control.
A little bit of a boink off the outside wall as well, but no harm, no foul, I think, on that one. Interestingly, Travis Barnes does not have the highest I rating on the roadside of our drivers out here right now. Of those, the highest I rating is actually Chris Torres, who sits in 6th. But Barnes isn't even close. He's actually barely half of what Chris Torres has in I rating. So I'm pretty pleasantly surprised at the way that Travis Barnes has been able to master this car on the roadside of things. He clearly has some talent. I think he needs to be racing a bit more on the roadside here in iRacing.
I wouldn't be opposed to seeing it. And Joe, with that point, I think it's especially amazing. He still has a rookie license in that roadside. So very, very strange from Travis Barnes, but clearly he's got a good feel of these cars. I would definitely think he may want to jump into the Skippies or dare I even say Lotus 79 or the Lotus 49, just anything that's real twitchy like these cars are. Obviously a lot more power going through the rear wheels as compared to these Legends cars, but he may find a home in some of those series.
I certainly think so. Getting closer to the halfway point in this race. We'll see if anybody tries to break it in 2 equal parts. Looks like Dagenstein has come in, though. Not sure if this was due to an incident. I think it was, actually. I see him missing his front end and trying to figure out where exactly it happened. And it seems to have been quite a while ago. So, unfortunately, I don't think we'll be able to get a replay on this. Regardless, he's decided it's worth coming in and get a spare car. And there you see the 13 with a fresh new front on it. Returns to the racing and is on his way.
Yeah, Joe, I've gone back a number of laps with Scott. I can't exactly tell you where it is, but I can tell you that on the lap before he came into the pits, he did have a spin coming through the back bus stop chicane as we have Eric Johnson Jr. now hopping into the pits.
Ah, there we go. People starting to make some calls there. So Johnson Jr., let's see if he takes tires on this, because I wouldn't expect them to play that big of a part, but you never know.
I agree, but I think the most important thing for him here is, yep, there you can see the car just pop back into place. Oh, he is going to take tires. He is indeed.
All right. They do take a while to refuel. They're not super quick in the pit lane filling these things up. He waits. Oh, but only fronts. I didn't see the rear go up. Did you?
No, I did not. So interesting strategy there from Eric Johnson Jr. Clearly just wants a little bit more front grip and isn't worried about the rear end of that car sliding around at all on him.
Andy Johnson also in. So as Eric Johnson heads out, Andy Johnson taking some service of his own. Still waiting on Scott Dagenstein. Well, actually, no, we saw Scott Dagenstein just head back out, and he's back in the pits again. Wonder if he already binned it. He did, unfortunately. As I go back and look, the 13 unfortunately went for a tumble coming through turns 5 and 6, and I think that might be day over. I think we're going to try and pull up a replay. Yeah, here we go.
Here we go. So this is the part of the track that we've seen catch out many, many drivers, brings it back under control nicely. He's going to line up here for turn 5, cuts the corner a little bit early, catches a little bit of that curb, and oh, hard hit for Scott.
That's why he visited again so quickly. I think that's day done, sadly. Isaiah Gill now in. The 24. There you see him also taking front tires. Does he take rears? Yes, he does.
And I can also report that Andy Johnson did the exact same thing. He took both sets of tires as well. So this far, Eric Johnson Jr., the only one to only take those front tires.
Okay, so maybe he knows something others don't. Still haven't seen Barnes, Dichinowski, or Torres come down pit lane. Those are the other 3 in our top 5 that we're still waiting on. Coming back on track, that is Gill right with, I think, Eric Johnson Jr. This is for position. Both of them having taken stops as Johnson Jr. just sawing away at the wheel, trying to find himself an opening. Really
trying to dive down the inside through here as they rise up the hill. Johnson's going to fall back behind and just wait for the opportunity to present itself on Isaiah Gill here. He's going to try to, I think, work for the draft once they get onto the NASCAR portion of the track.
Oh, but look at how that car is handling. I think the 14 is way too loose now that he only put the fronts on. They've got all the grip and the rears are just slipping and sliding everywhere. Falls away a little bit up onto the banking. Gill gets him back about 1 second. Oh, but he's strong coming into the corner. Oh,
he's able to catch it and keep it under control, and I can report that Eric Johnson Jr. did just come over the radio and say he was regretting taking only front tires as it was really hurting him.
It was a gamble, and I'm not sure that it's going to pay off. Woo, wow, actually great catch, though. A lesser driver would have seen that thing off into the Armco, but at least Eric Johnson Jr. is still running. Speaking of still running, we're waiting on Barnes and Dichinowski to take their stops.
There's Barnes on the screen right there. He is down onto the apron, looking like he's gonna keep going for another lap.
All right. And it's a big, big gap back to Dichinowski right now. It's over a minute to the number 18 car. And in fact, I think Gill, with his fresh tires, is quickly catching up to him. So P2, I think, is going to change hands just in a few moments. Yeah, the fresher rubber of the 24 is visible, just leaving him behind.
Absolutely powering out of that last corner, diving down low and being able to put everything that he wants to into those rear tires. So very, very helpful there for Isaiah Gill as he's now going to work his way through the back chicane. Now, the thing to be watching here is these lap times for Isaiah Gill. I think he's going to be running maybe even a second a lap faster than our leader, Travis Barnes, if Barnes chooses not to pit.
Well, Barnes has almost a full lap ahead of him right now, so he needs Barnes to stay out for quite a few more laps. Let's watch and see what he can put down. This is his first full-timed lap. The last one really can't tell because it was his out lap from the pit lane as he crosses a 35.8. That is a 10th off of his quickest lap of the race. The 38.2 of Travis Barnes. So yes, indeed, the 11 should come in, or else if the longer he stays out, the more time he's going to be giving up to Isaiah Gill.
And if Travis Barnes has some sort of overlay brought up on his racing rig, he will have seen that time, but he chooses to stay out once again, Joe. He's got about a minute lead over Isaiah Gill, but he's got to be careful. He needs to come in ASAP, otherwise this race is going to slip away from him very quickly.
Almost makes me wonder. I mean, that's a big difference between laps. Gill was running 138s before he came in, 139s on some of those laps. Do you think maybe even a two-stopper would be the quicker option coming in for that fresh rubber again? It gets you so much time.
Well, it very well might, but I think they've only got one other set of boots to put on the car. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, so that may not be an option to do that twice.
Checking now to see tire set limit at 3. So yeah, they can come in for one more. They get the one they start on and then 2 extras. So if you fancy that sort of thing, then I guess you can try and see if you can run it to the end.
Yeah, it's a decent strategy. Then I'm just trying to run some of the numbers with about a 50-second pit delta from the time you come in to the time that you leave. It could certainly help you out ever so slightly as we watch Matthew Buchanowski trying to chase down Eric Johnson Jr. Johnson Jr. clearly still struggling on those unchanged rear tires.
Oh, but struggling to get it turned into the corner. That was Dichanowski, who we rode on board with through Heartburn Turn. He almost binned it all the way to the outside barrier. That cost him a little bit of time to the number 14.
And our leader, Travis Barnes, heeding our advice. Travis, right at the halfway point of this race, dives into the pit lane.
All right, so he's going to split it evenly into 2, it seems. Makes me wonder, then, Gill, let's see, he's been out for 3 laps. So about lap 16 or 17 for him. Don't think that works out to 3 even parts, though.
No, my guess is if he and Johnson and any of the other guys who came in around lap 15, what they're going to do is they'll probably go 15, 15, 10. So come into the pits with about 10 laps to go and just try to get an absolute power lap down. Not sure if that's going to work out to the best as Travis Barnes is out and on his way. 47 seconds stationary in the pits. That is 2 seconds quicker than Isaiah Gill's pit time.
Okay, then. Actually, no, Barnes, I'm seeing 21.7 on my timing sheets. That's a lot slower than Isaiah Gill's, which will help him continue to try and cut that down. But as the timing and scoring starts to catch up, it's still a whopping 22 seconds between P1 and P2 as Eric Johnson Jr., with his regretful decision on tires, is actually going to come back in again.
I think this is a good call from Eric. He clearly was just having absolutely no pace. It's gonna push him down the order. He's probably gonna come out somewhere between Andy Johnson and Chris Torres in 5th and 6th place, but he has got to get new rear tires, and there you go. It looks like he's just taken rears here. So a very good call from Eric Johnson Jr. He's got the speed. He just needs to get the call. All
right, back out and on his way. Did he manage to stay on the lead lap? Yes, he did. Looks like Barnes Still has a ways to go to get around to the rear of him, but we only have 5 cars left on the lead lap currently. Andy Johnson, the last of them. Travis Barnes comes around after he's gotten his fresh rubber, but we won't know his pace until the next time through, as that was his out lap. Isaiah Gill, though, continuing to set some of his fastest laps of the race, a 35.2 for the 24 on lap 19. That is his personal best so far.
And that's just when he needs to do it, Joe. You know, we always talk about out laps and in laps and how that's the way to actually try to counter somebody. Well, that's exactly what he's doing here. He's trying to prevent any sort of fight back from Travis Barnes on the out lap right now by putting in his best. He is just driving the wheels off of that thing, trying to get it forward. The gap now about to 25 seconds or so.
I think he may have pushed it a little too hard, though. Well, minute 37 last time compared to 1:35s for all of his 3 previous laps. Dichinowski is coming in. I think this is his first stop. All right, so where will he cycle out? Looks like Johnson Jr. is actually, oh, well, he's going by, but Johnson Jr. just smacked the wall coming out of the final chicane. Not sure how much damage the 14 got from it. Let's take a look here on the cameras. Be coming out of that last right-left. I think he got a little greedy.
You see him here, good line up for the corner. Takes him maybe a hair shallow. Oh, Joe, it's the curbs again. There you can see a little bit more of a scrape rather than a full-on thunk into the wall. So I don't think that's going to massively affect him. These cars can take a decent amount of licks. Not like an F1 or Indy car, though, where if you brush the wall, you are done for the day.
Yeah, you got to wonder, though, how many licks does it take for that car to wind down to nothing? Meanwhile, Travis Barnes, a 1:34.4, and that wasn't even his best lap of the race. So he is on it. Compare that to Isaiah Gill last time, a 36.4, 2 seconds faster than P2. Looks like Gill's ploy not quite working at the time.
No, it's not. Travis Barnes just knows exactly what he's doing and how to do it here as we watch Isaiah Gill working his way around those tires now. About 6 laps old, so rubber's starting to wear in. He's still going to have a decent amount of grip, but with Barnes setting in laps like we just saw him do, I've got to think the prospect of getting onto that top step of the podium starting to slip away ever so slightly for Isaiah Gill.
I suspect so, too. Right now, between some of our championship leaders, though, Barnes with a 2-position advantage over Eric Johnson Jr. And let's see. And actually, interestingly, Isaiah Gill is leading our points as well. So this will not necessarily swap it around, but is going to keep things tight and make it very, very interesting once we head to the next round. If it finishes how it stays here. We have to remember, though, we saw a number of drivers who were looking at really good finishes back at Sonoma that threw it away with silly little mistakes, and they've got to run for another 15, 16 more laps here.
Exactly, and we've seen good drivers and great drivers here today get caught out by either these curbs or just a little bit of a tank slapper, as we almost jinx Travis Barnes there as he comes up over the crest, the rear end just getting a little bit squirrely on him. He's able to keep going, and it looks like he has everything nice and collected now, but this race, while it looks like, you know, Barnes is able to pull away quite easily, it's far from over. If he makes a mistake, this could be interesting very quickly.
We've lost a few drivers. We've mentioned some of them. Plybon, Cheney, Denny, and Caden Anderson has been our latest in the 37 to leave the race. Looks like Dagenstein, who we saw hit for the second time, took repairs and is still going in the number 13, despite actually going over. Is he going to lose it for good this time? Oh, that was a pretty big hit, and he does take a tow. I think that was the last one for Dagenstein, so we got to see him at least for a little while longer.
Yeah, just a bad day for Scott. And truthfully, this track, can really come out and bite you. Either you love it or you hate it. There isn't a whole lot of middle ground from those I've talked to that have run it either in the sim or in real life. It's just one of those things that it suits your style and you really like the way that it goes, or you cannot figure out the mysteries of this place to save your life and you would rather go anywhere else in the world. So I think Scott going into that latter category.
Looks like Dichinowski, unfortunately, getting a little bit more damage through turn one. Let's take a replay. Heartburn turn with another victim. The rear starts to come around, and that inside wall is right there to collect you.
Yeah, and you said it earlier in the broadcast, Joe, that certain sectors on this track almost act like a street course rather than an oval, and that is certainly one of them. If you catch that wrong, the walls are right there to greet you. But it does look like he is at least able to get back under his own power and get going again. He may decide to come into the pits here to take some repairs on that car. As you can see, there's a little bit of damage on the front end.
Yeah, it doesn't look dire, at least for the time being, as he sends it down into the back chicane once again. But that does split apart many of our good battles. Everybody is at least 13 seconds away from one another or more currently, and it's all going to be down to them focusing and putting in the good laps from here.
Yeah, at this point, it almost becomes just like a hot lap session. You are running this far out by yourself. You just need to focus on being as absolutely consistent as possible. With the number of errors we've seen, I don't think it's about trying to set the fastest lap. It's just about minimizing errors everywhere you can.
It almost looked like when we were watching from certain angles on that 18, like the car was crabbing slightly. Not sure if it was just an optical illusion or what, but just looked odd in some ways. Meanwhile, this is our leader, the number 11 of Travis Barnes. 34 seconds over Isaiah Gill. Still running in the minute 34s here versus Isaiah Gill switching back and forth between 36s and 37s.
Travis Barnes just putting on an absolute masterclass here today. Really, really impressive. His consistency to be able to run in those 134s, those top 134s, absolutely remarkable.
As we ride on board, taking it down into the chicane, he's going to have to put a lap on Andy Johnson. Last one on the lead lap here in fourth position. Looks like Andy's going to stay high and give him a nice, easy pass through to the inside.
Yeah, good heads up there from Andy. He knows exactly what's going on, doesn't want to make too much of a hassle for the leader, and that allows for Travis Barnes to just slip on through into the front chicane.
I think the Dory Award today is looking like it might wind up going to Ryan McLeod in the 88. He just keeps swimming, and he's 3 laps down from the next car up right now. That's Jack Franks that he would like to chase down. So my tip of the hat to the number 88 currently, who has not decided to give up, which can be easy to do, especially in a smaller field where you don't have a lot of cars to fight against and you're just kind of running on your own like he is. Meanwhile, we are watching Barnes now come through turn 6, up and over the hill, plunging back down, and he has to take it onto the oval.
And still running it very, very evenly. I think at this point he's really focusing on tire conservation and not trying to overdrive the car wherever possible. He knows he's only got one stop in this race, not going to come in again, so he really doesn't want to overtax those tires and run into a problem near the end of the race. He is looking at everything that it is with about 13 to go here, so definitely keep it on.
Through the backstretch chicane, and then back onto the oval portion we go as we now head over to Matthew Dichinowski. Now, earlier I was wondering if that car was crabbing, but I don't see the wheel held at an off angle. So I think maybe it was just me looking at the car weird here.
I was taking a look at it, Joe, and it looks like on our main feed it's fine, and one of the glitches of iRacing that I think what you may have been seeing was the left front tire just looked like it was sort of sticking out at an odd angle, but I think that's cosmetic, is the car running relatively consistent with the times that he has been.
Yeah, does look to be okay from here. Getting close to now 10 laps to go in this 40-lap event. It has been a difficult one for these Legends cars. As we once again turn our attention back to Travis Barnes. I wonder if we could ride on board for a lap with the 11, just to see how the quickest of them are doing it from his perspective.
See, even just on something as simple as running as that flat line, fighting the car, that's how twitchy these cars are. Diving it down, flick to the left, avoid those curbs. A little bit of opposite locking, get as close to that wall as possible before you get to take a breather to work back onto the NASCAR section.
He is kind of seeing it jitter around in his hands, where it should be probably pretty smooth, but now we come up to the other chicane. Let's see how he handles this one. It's very under control.
He does. I mean, that car is absolutely dancing underneath him in just a micro sense, but he knows exactly what it's doing and not letting it get out of control. And there you can see, Joe, it is one of the things that really separates the good racing drivers from the great racing drivers, that spatial awareness, how close he can get to that wall. He knows exactly where his tires are. A little bit of the curb and catches it.
That was a mistake out of him. But, like you said, he manages it well. And up and through turn 6. That should give you an idea of just how blind that corner is as well. Onto the banking and back where we started watching him. That's how you do it if you are Travis Barnes.
It's a really impressive drive from Travis, and all of that wheel motion shows you just how difficult it is to control these cars and how impressive it is that we have seen all of these guys be able to run as many clean laps as they have. These are cars that do not normally want to be suited to a road course, and the fact that they are driving them around here with such precision, very, very impressive from South Sound.
That gap between P1 and P2 continues to grow. We were talking about it being, around 33 seconds earlier on. It is up to 44 now. As there's Gil right now coming onto NASCAR 1 and 2 himself. Just not looking like he's got anything. I just don't think there's much he can do. He's essentially going to have to hope that Barnes makes some sort of big error that causes him to head into the pits and take his spare car.
Exactly. I think that's the only hope he has for it. At pulling out a win here at this point. And that's not to say Isaiah's drove a very good race today. Obviously up 13 positions from starting near the back of the field. Clearly has some speed, but just doesn't have the consistency that Travis Barnes does.
Certainly doesn't seem to be the case. He's also taken quite a bit of the track in places, though. He was right up on top of that grass on the entry into the last chicane. Let's see what he's got as we ride on his roof. A little bit better visibility from up here. You don't realize how low they are in the cockpit, especially when you're watching from the cameras up top. Looks a little bit more timid here into 3 and 4 compared to what we saw with Barnes.
Well, that's a little bit of a psychology game coming into it. You know, we saw Gil have a little bit of a spin out there earlier in the race. And Joe, when that happens, you as a driver, whether you want to or not, you will back out of the corner ever so slightly as he gets into a big tank slapper there coming out of turn 7, but able to get it back under him.
Whew. Thank goodness it almost threw that away. Why don't we check on Eric Johnson Jr., however? Remember, he took the front tires and then took rear tires, so there's a few laps difference between his fronts and his rears. So I'm wondering how this is affecting the handling now. Supposedly, I mean, logic would dictate that it now understeers. So let's see if that's the case.
Yeah, it looks like there's a hair oversteer into that car, Joe. That's not normally as wide as you would want to take it coming through there. This will be a good indicator. Able to get the apex relatively well and get it under control as we ride on board with him. Yeah, look how much he's having to put into that wheel, almost completely crossing his arms.
Yep, that is massive understeer. But he's also going to be lapped because Travis Barnes just went past him. That means we are down to one other car on the lead lap, and that is Isaiah Gill. So almost like Johnson Jr. is getting a little taste of his own medicine. Last time he lapped pretty much everybody and even was 2 laps ahead of most of the field. This time, instead, it seems that Travis Barnes is going to be the one to do that. He's got a lot to make up to Isaiah Gill, so I'm not sure if he'll manage to get him a lap down, but you never know.
Yeah, I mean, based off of lap times, there's about a 2 seconds between what Gill and Barnes are running right now. He needs to make up, looking at it, about 40 seconds. So about 20 laps is what he'd need to do that, and only 9 to go here at the Roval. So I don't think he's going to be able to complete that feat, but if Gill makes a mistake, he certainly may be able to.
Travis Barnes going to take home maximum points here today by the looks of things. And you can see the pace difference between himself and Eric Johnson Jr. He passed him a little less than a lap ago, and already he's got many car lengths ahead of him. I think, do my eyes deceive me, do we have a battle brewing out on track? This the 1 and the 00, Franks and Jones, not too far ahead of our leader right now, are closing in on one another.
My goodness gracious, Joe, you are right. Sean Jones starting to come in on Jack Franks. You can see it there ahead of your leader. That pink and that green car working their way through the back chicane. This is a battle.
Is it going to get interrupted by our leader? There is a very wide bit of track around here that they can race. But even still, if they're more focused on one another, they might not be watching out to see where those blue flags come along. They break down into the final chicane. Oh, and sending it way too deep into there. Sean Jones, unfortunately, going to cost himself a few tenths.
And to make matters worse, he wasn't able to get down to the apex for the second part of that chicane, rode up onto the curbs and got it up onto 2 wheels. But very good for him to be able to catch the cars. We've seen that catch out many, many drivers here today. Coming now through the infield section, the gap has grown back out to about 2.3 seconds. But Franks, I think, definitely lacking in speed as compared to Sean Jones.
Sean Jones, though, having a few connection problems. He keeps blinking in and out. Won't make battling all that fun. Here comes the number 11. I think he's going to make short work on Jones and then eventually up to Franks. They enter the banking one more time. Barnes going to get a nice dose of the slipstream from that double lot. Or not, actually, because he runs low, and it seems Sean is going to continue to ride on the banking.
Yeah, you know, going into this, we were talking about just how much of a draft fest this was going to be, but we really haven't seen it play too much of a factor here today, Joe, as it's really come down to running the apron or running the high line. Just whatever works better for the car and whatever you feel better, that seems to be what people are making up the time.
He'll be to the inside of Sean Jones. Does he let him through, or is he going to rebuff him? No, he's not going to let him through very quickly. He's got to be careful here. If Sean makes a mistake in front of him and collects him like something like that, then he could suddenly lose that lead very quickly.
Oh, heart and mouth moment there for Travis Barnes, but able to get up and around Sean Jones. That'll make him very, very happy to see. Now he's going to send his sights up the road at Jack Franks, and Sean Jones will be able to maybe pick up a few tenths by following in the tire tracks of our clear and present leader.
also watching, and I think Dichinowski might be gaining on Andy Johnson, if I'm looking at the lap times right. So that could also evolve into something. This is Johnson on screen, being chased by the 18, coming into the infield right now.
Yeah, and looking at some of the last lap times, Andy Johnson running a 1 minute 40.8, Matthew Dichinowski running a 39.708. So definitely catching up there. That gap now down to about 2.1 seconds. Dichinowski's had a bit of a tough race. Oh, as we've had a big incident for Travis Barnes taking a ride over the curbs on the back hairpin.
Ooh. So a mistake from the number 11 for one of the first times. Let's see, here we go. This is coming onto the backstretch right now. It'll be, I think, at the first two apexes.
It will indeed. That's Jack Franks. He was able to just get around, moves in, the car locks up on him, and he decides to just sort of bail on it and go over those sausage curbs. He's got to hope that didn't affect him too hard or mess up the suspension in any way.
I think he's okay because he just went by once again and is now lapped Jack Franks. So if we come back live, the 11 averts disaster and still retains about a 50-second lead over the number 24.
Yeah, that gap not really going away for Travis Barnes despite that error. And there, as you can see in the replay, that is the shot of Barnes being able to get himself around Jack Franks. So kudos to him. But jumping back live, there you see now he's setting his sights up the road on Chris Torres, the next lap car he has to dispatch with only 6 laps remaining here at the Charlotte Roval.
Keeping half an eye on either of them, because it looks like Johnson Dichinowski still only split by 2.5 seconds, but unfortunately for Jones and Franks, that one has gone apart 6 seconds between those two.
Yeah, exactly. And now as we watch that closing speed, you can see just how much Travis Barnes has this field dead to rights. Riding on board with him here, that's Chris Torres up ahead of him. Look at that closing speed, Joe, just how much more confident he is on the brakes, catching that moment of massive oversteer, and now trying to get around Torres, but Torres not making it easy for him.
Like I said, this is the big danger points for Travis Barnes. He's got to give a wide berth to some of these drivers and try to make a nice, easy pass out of it, or he could just unfortunately throw it all away with a silly mistake or getting caught up in somebody else's silly mistake. Here we go. This is a nice spot coming down the straight up towards turn 5, and now he is clean and passed.
I was going to say that's about the area that he would want to make that move if he could. It's a pretty easy place to go. You're able to get a good blast out of the corner, and now for him, he is going to set his eyes forward and have a little bit of clean track in front of him.
Down to 5 laps to go. Barnes, with him having to lap traffic and with us seeing a mistake from him finally, has not been stretching away from Gill like he was before. But again, he doesn't need to necessarily. All he has to do is finish ahead of him, which he's got a pretty good chance of doing currently. Here we go as the 18 has cut it down to 1.8 seconds. No, make that 0.8 of a second. My goodness. And the 28 could be very much under threat for that 4th spot.
Most certainly Dichinowski putting in some good laps here. You know, we talked about it last time we checked in this battle, just how fast he was. That gap now down to 1.4 seconds on the last lap. Dichinowski was able to put in a 140.38 as compared to Johnson's 141.538. So about a second gap difference there. But I think one of the things that's holding Dichinowski back ever so slightly is he's gaining time in the infield, but losing it on the exits to the NASCAR corners, the prime overtaking zone, and that's allowing for Johnson to hold him at bay ever so slightly.
But he is trying to pull the slipstream off of the 28 there on the banking. He moved up high when he saw that that's where the 28 was riding. And we come across the line this time for Andy Johnson, a 41.8. Dichinowski, a 40.9. Just shy of a second faster once again.
Closing in again. Here comes to the place that seems to soothe Matthew Dichinowski, working their way down through the infield. If he can keep this all nice and tidy, he may be able to have a run by lap's end.
Filling up the mirrors of the number 28, bigger and bigger. He's got plenty of time to try and get this done. Just has to be clean. Another little lockup. We've seen a lot of lockups from the 28, and he gets squirrely yet again coming out of turn 6. Doesn't lose the car. It's down to 0.7 of a second. They hit the banking. Let's see what happens now.
And it looks like Matthew Dichinowski was going to try to stay in the draft, thinking about drifting down to the low side, but says no. He's going to stay up on the banking and try to hold that momentum that allow for Dichinowski to pull that gap back up to about 7.5 of a second. But they're going to brake hard here into the back chicane. Another lockup from Andy Johnson.
Oh, and he's going to have to cut the course. The slowdown penalty he's going to get from this will easily hand over 4th place to Dichinowski, and there he goes. A late race error from the 28. Unfortunately, sees a position slip through his fingers. Eric Johnson Jr.'s in the pits, though. This has just happened now. There he is. He looks like he hit something. The left side of that car is missing a few pieces.
Oh my goodness gracious, Eric Johnson Jr.'s race going from bad to worse. We jump back to a replay to try to find out what happened.
I think it was no, I guess it was before this. Where in the world did he do this?
It was coming in to 3 and 4. Yeah, this is it right there. Just took a little bit too much speed diving into turn 4 and clipped the left side of the car.
And remember, he already used his free repair. So I think he's come back out after realizing that he doesn't have it left anymore, and there's not a whole lot he can do other than spend a lot of time waiting for the repairs to finish. And this late in the race, he'll watch a whole bunch of positions go by. That now means that Dichinowski gets promoted to 3rd, and Andy Johnson, who was up into 4th, almost loses it. I think he smacked the wall there.
He did, just had a little bit of understeer coming out of the corner, went up right into the wall. We're going to jump on the replay here. You can see it, blammo, right into that outside wall, not getting the front tires to grip, as now he's starting to go and break down into that back chicane, looking like that car is very difficult to control here in the closing stages after that accident.
So now Eric and Andy are both sporting right side damage. Well, actually, no, I take that back. Johnson Jr. was on the left side. But between the pair of them, it'll make it an interesting race to the finish.
It most certainly will, and the gap between them about 2.5 seconds, so not out of the realm of possibility for something interesting to happen. Yeah, you can see just how he's trying to control that car in a straight line, keeping everything nice and easy. That's Isaiah Gill coming up behind him, your 2nd place driver, so a little bit of lap traffic that he's going to have to contend with. And Gill's got to be careful to make sure that that injured car doesn't act unexpectedly on him.
That's a good point. Oh, it does look pretty unpredictable from what we were riding on board. Sawing away at the wheel, trying to keep him from turning around on him. Meanwhile, way ahead of this, the number 11 of Travis Barnes is coming to take the white flag. 40 laps of racing, and he has shown that it's not just Eric Johnson Jr. who's good at these road courses, but seems like Travis Barnes is a serious threat anytime we get to the twisty tracks.
He certainly is, and I would love if Travis could have been there last week at Sonoma to maybe make a challenge. I think that would have been very interesting, but you saw on your screen there, Andy Johnson taking another big lick from the wall, hurting his car again, but he is still able to keep up a gap to Eric Johnson Jr.
He's only got to do it for another lap and some change. to be able to come home with 4th place. There's our leader, though. One last time up and onto the banking. There's really not much to do from here. Just go cleanly through 2 more chicanes. He's still pushing, though, as the tail wags on that number 11.
You try to tell a driver to slow down and they'll just keep going faster, Joe, but he keeps it down onto the apron here on the last circuit around the track for the number 11, lining up for this back chicane one last time, getting onto the brakes and slowing it down the best he can.
Barnes is now free to the end with a 54-second lead over Isaiah Gill, the only other car on the same lap as him. As he takes it down to the last chicane, brings it up past the pit entry, Travis Barnes sends it through the chicane and claims victory here at Charlotte. Behind him, it's a long wait before we get to Isaiah Gill. And it looks like Andy Johnson is going to be able to outrun Eric Johnson Jr. because it's now split to about 5 to 6 seconds between the pair of them. We ride on board with Gill. He may have tried to dress up like Superman today, but he wasn't the fastest flyer among them.
No, it looked like Isaiah may have had something at the beginning as we watched him climb his way up through the field, and he is our highest mover of the race, up 13 spots from his qualifying position, but just never looked like he could ultimately challenge Travis Barnes here today, but he works his way now through the banking one last time. A well-earned 2nd place for Isaiah Gill.
And of course, Dichinowski already a lap down. In fact, just ahead of him will claim 3rd as well. So that wraps up our drivers. We're going to take a quick break here on the Global Sim Racing Channel. We'll come back with the unofficial results as well as driver interviews. So stick around. Welcome back to Charlotte Motor Speedway. With us just finishing the latest round of the South Sound Speedway eRacing series, Travis Barnes now comes away with a victory. Very similar to what we saw a week ago, but with a different driver up at the top. Only one more car finished all 40 laps. Isaiah Gill behind him in 2nd place. Matthew Dichinowski claims 3rd, but a lap down from our leader, and Andy Johnson finishes in 4th. Then it's Eric Johnson Jr. in P5, followed by Chris Torres in 6th and Jack Franks in 7th. Sean Jones with a P8 was then followed by Ryan McLeod in 9th, and the last car to actually finish as Scott Dagenstein was our first DNF.
In 11th was the other DNFs of Caden Anderson, an early leader of the race. Brock Denny in 12th behind him. Eric Cheney, Hayden Plybon, and Jeff Peterson rounding out your field.
Of course, we've got our winner ready to talk to us, Travis Barnes, who will join us here. And Travis, congratulations on the victory. It seemed like you had things pretty well under control for almost the entire race.
Just minimized mistakes, got me to the front here, and staying quick. Didn't let off the throttle the whole race, so it helped out a lot.
Did you happen to catch any of the race the week prior at Sonoma? Because Eric Johnson Jr. did a very similar thing and just whomped everybody. Did you expect a little bit of a bigger fight from him today?
I did, and I figured had he not just gotten so many unfortunate circumstances that I definitely would have been him and I at the end here. He was just as fast as I was, and I'm not going to downplay his speed. He had a lot, so there was no questions about it. He just got unfortunate circumstances his way. I missed last week's race because I had other priorities going on with a different league, so other than that, I'm just happy to be back in victory lane.
Well, next week we go back to our traditional oval courses. And speaking of tradition, it's back to a classic, North Wilkesboro, the 87 version. Looking forward to that?
Yeah, I'm ready for North Wilkesboro. I like that track a lot. Probably one of that in Nashville Fairgrounds is probably my favorite ovals tracks currently. So see what I can get done there in the street stock.
Look forward to seeing how you fare as well. That was Travis Barnes, our winner here today at Charlotte Motor Speedway. Up next, we have our second place finisher, Isaiah Gill, and DJ's caught up with him.
Well, Isaiah, to start out with, you clearly had some good pace today, but had to work your way up through the field. So I have to ask, for starters, what happened in qualifying?
What happened to me in qualifying is on the last chicane, I got a little too far farther than the AstroTurf, and it junked my lap.
Gotcha. I wondered if there was something like that. Well, that's a bit heartbreaking, and obviously you had a great run through the field and clearly some good speed, but it looks like Travis just had the field on lock today.
Oh yeah, he definitely had the pace to win. It was more of a just for me just not getting a lap down and try to have the joy of lapping everybody, you know?
Yeah, I fully understand that. Well, we're headed back to traditional fare in the next couple of weeks. Are you looking forward to getting back to the ovals, or do you maybe want to see a few more of these road courses to get you some good podiums?
Oh no, I'm definitely looking forward to the oval. I think it's street stocks at North Wilkesboro, and depending on our last street stock race, should be a good show.
Well, that's indeed what we are banking on. And Isaiah, congratulations again.
Thank you.
All right. And then Joe Peak has now caught up with Andy Johnson,
our fourth place finisher. And Andy, it seemed like you were at least holding things down pretty decently for much of the race. Towards the end, though, you started to get a little bit of bangs and dents on the car.
Yeah, it was a good race. Just kind of same thing as Sonoma. I just tried to stay smooth and consistent, and the car just started pushing really bad there at the end, and I just didn't have anything left. I was slowing way down and still just skating the front tires. So got under the fence a couple of times and just barely hung on to it there at the end to get it across the finish line. But I think this is 4 top 5s in a row for me, qualifying up front, and so it's been a really good stretch.
Well, there's not too much of that stretch left here in the championship, but this will give you a few points, obviously, in the run. I mean, do you have any realistic hopes of trying to work your way farther up? It seems like there's a bit of a gap between yourself and the top 3 currently.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a gap. I made up a couple of points or stayed even with Junior with beating him with his issues today. He out-qualified me. I out-finished him. So it'll be really close to staying even with those top guys. If they have problems here in the next couple of weeks, we're getting back to hardcore short track racing there with the street stocks at North Wilkesboro and then the ARCA cars at Southern National. Those guys could get tangled up in a couple of accidents, and I could be right there hunting for a top 3.
Do either of them seem like a particular strength for you? Do you consider one of them your favorite?
I'm pretty good in the street stocks. I've ran up front in the street stock races so far. Had my best qualifying effort in the entire series in the street stocks last time out in them, where I put it on the front row. So I think that'll be a really strong suit. I really like North Wilkesboro. It's a really fun track. All kinds of different lines and entry points into the corners. And it takes a lot of finesse to get those street stocks off the corners there.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how you fare and if you can manage to catch those top 3 in the points. And again, congratulations on a top 5 today, sir.
All right. Thank you.
That was Andy Johnson with a 4th in the end here at Charlotte Motor Speedway's road course, but it's going to close us out. Of course, we want to give a big thank you to our sponsors before we go, starting with Key Property Services. If you want to check them out, they can be found at kpsinc.net. And then, of course, United Roofs. If you want to get a free estimate, they are at unitedroofs.com. Thanks to the companies that provide the software and the hardware for our broadcasts that are listed here on your screen. And additional thanks go to June Lalana, provides our wonderful music. Her Bandcamp is there listed below at the very bottom. Thanks to the team today, DJ, Sean, and Dougie. If you'd like to find out more about GSRC, including upcoming races, you can find it at globalsimracingchannel.com. Also, check out our social media outlets, which includes Twitter at GSR Channel, Facebook at Global Sim Racing Channel, and Instagram at GSRC_Graham. If you'd like to support us, our merchandise store is simply gsrc.storeenvy.com, but we have a link in the description below so that you don't have to type it out. If you go down there, you might see the big red subscribe button on our channel. Make sure and click that so that you don't miss a moment here on GSRC. And as we mentioned, North Wilkesboro is up next. The Street Stocks, that'll be Saturday, February 6th at 10 p.m. Eastern. We also have upcoming races for other series listed on the screen, so check those out and mark them down on your calendar. However, until next time, race clean, race hard. We'll see you on the track.